I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and if you don't know about the BMW M550i, you really should. That's because the M550i is one of the best cars that BMW currently makes. It's a 5 Series sedan, that much is obvious, but underneath that long bonnet is a 4.4 litre twin-turbo petrol V8. A bit like the M5, you might be thinking. Well, yes, but minus $100,000 and actually on suspension that doesn't make you want to stop the car and get out on an Australian country road. So this may very well be the best Grand Touring sedan that you can get for under $200,000 on the road here in Australia. And in fact, in pure trim, the M550i is something of a bargain, but we'll talk more about that later in today's video. And we'll do our usual thing. We'll jump inside the M550i, check out the interior, we'll sit in the back seat, have a look at the boot, talk about running costs, and then get this V8 5 Series out onto the road to see what's what. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below this video. Just before I get into the car and take the M550i out on a great country road here in Australia, let's talk about what motivates this beast. Underneath the bonnet is the same 4.4 litre twin-turbo V8 that you get in the M5 competition, which sits above this vehicle in the 5 Series lineup here in Australia. There's a little bit less power, 390 kilowatts and 750 newton meters of torque. The M5 does give you 460 kilowatts, but the same amount of torque. And as we'll find out in just a moment, out on the road, the M550i feels pretty darn quick, particularly compared to an AMG E53 or an Audi S6. In many ways, the BMW M550i is the ultimate triple threat. It's got brawn, the 4.4 litre V8 under the bonnet, it's got brains, this interior, which I'll come to in just a moment, and it's a good looker as well. But why is the cabin so special? Well, it's because BMW are basically doing the best interiors in the automotive industry at the moment, in my opinion. The quality is super high, BMW are riding a wave of success, and the interiors are made very, very well, even if some of their recent exterior designs are a little questionable. But also, the integration of technology is best in industry. There's still buttons and knobs for the things that you would want those things for. You also get a touchscreen, you get a really pleasant digital instrument cluster. There's a perfect mix of modern and traditional, and I really like that. Now, this particular interior is specified quite conservatively. The M550i has picked up these fantastic seats with really tall bolstering, both on your torso and shoulders. These ones are black Dakota leather with blue contrast stitching, and we also have this dark grey sort of geometric pattern for the secondary trims, but you can choose a much more emotional 5 Series interior. There's grey leather, there's tan leather, there's beige leather. You can go a lot more out there. You can also upgrade the quality of your leather to Napa or BMW individual leather, which is even softer again. And for the trims, there are a variety of woods, there's aluminium, there's carbon, or you can do these sort of interesting takes on metal structures. So this is kind of the most basic it gets, and you can go up from here to something more interesting. But about that technology, on the LCI or facelift 5 Series, we now have a larger screen up here. It is touch driven, it has BMW's latest infotainment software, but we still have the iDrive remote controller down here, which is fantastic, perfectly weighted, shortcut keys. This is what I use when the car's actually in motion. And then if you just have to quickly choose something on screen when you're stopped, it's as easy as that. And you're not actually locked out of the touchscreen while the car is moving like you are in a Mazda, for example. Head of the driver, maybe a slight weak spot. The digital gauges look good in this car, but they're not customizable enough, and the full map that sits within them is actually really basic and doesn't give you things like street names. BMW should take a leaf from the Audi virtual cockpit book on that next time around. Climate, easy to see, again, dials, but also a cool touchscreen integrated in that. Shortcut keys for the media as well. And then practicality is also a strong point. So we've got decent sized cup holders, a wireless phone charger that your phone stays on and actually charges. That's not something you can take for granted, sadly. And then a dual fin armrest here with a fair bit of space, USB-C charging. And I should also point out, I forgot to mention the fact that these seats are actually 18-way power adjustable you really can get into a great driving position. They're also heated and they have 2-position memory on both sides. And if you upgrade your leather even further, you also get cooled seats too. So up front, really nice command center. Let's have a look in the back. Much like the G23 series that sits beneath the 5 Series in the lineup, the G30 chassis gave a lot more rear legroom when it launched onto the Australian market than the car that it replaced. And that of course carries over to the facelift 5 Series that I'm sitting in here. It's genuinely usable for 4 adults, and you could get a 5th in the middle if you really had to, but it is a perch, headroom's a problem, and it has a big hump in the floor as well. So keep it to 4 and everybody will be happy. For myself at 6 foot, headroom is no issue even though we do have a pano roof in this car. Legroom's good and toe room is also acceptable even with my seat set as low as it will go. In terms of amenities back here, we've got air vents, we've got 2 climate zones, we've got USB-C ports, and we have a flip down armrest with deployable cup holders, and that's it. Thought there was going to be more storage in it, but that's all right. And then we also have a pass through here to the boot, and this car actually would suit sports like skiing because it has standard all-wheel drive, so that's a nice little feature to have. Plus you'll notice that the seat in the back is inclined well, supports your legs. All the soft leather-lined materials continue through to the back seat here. That quality really resounds in the 5 Series, so even though the front seat is where you want to be in this car, the back seat is hardly economy class. As I mentioned, this particular M550i is a facelift or LCI of the current G30 5 Series. The facelift is a subtle one, but you'll see that BMW are now doing these 3D structured taillights. The new X3 and X4 were unveiled yesterday actually, and they have picked up the same shape-ish of light, but even more dramatic. But the 5 Series got there first. This particular car is tanzanite blue, looks really stunning, almost black in the dark, but then when the sun hits it, it really pops. Beautiful color, although I think I'd probably go for carbon black, which is similar, but even darker in low light, and of course a heritage BMW color. Now, unfortunately, there's no more 5 Series station wagons available in Australia, so it's sedan only for this car, but it is practical. 530 litres of space. As you can see, there's no trouble getting the 3 Chasing Cars suitcases into this car, even though the aperture is fairly narrow because of the wheel arch intrusion in this vehicle. And then, well, there is no underfloor. This car doesn't have a spare tyre, but what it does have is a little bit of extra storage off to the right-hand side of the boot, and you have a net over here for your manuals and for your first aid kit. Power operation for the boot lid, always a bit of a indulgence on a sedan, I must say, but it's practical, it's big, it's good for a trip away. So what's it going to cost you to run an M550i? Well, in a lot of ways, it depends on how hard you plan to drive this car. With a twin turbo petrol V8 under the bonnet, I won't lie to you, it can drink, but it can also be quite efficient. On a long road trip on the highway, you will see 8 litres per 100 Ks out of this engine without too much trouble. But on a country road, where you're really tapping into this car's brute force performance, 16, 17 litres per 100 Ks is also realistic. And of course, this engine requires super premium petrol, 98 octane at a minimum. Now, BMW do offer prepaid service plans, which helps control the cost of the maintenance of the car. And for the 5 Series, it's $1,950 for 5 years and 80,000 kilometers of servicing. Keep in mind though, that is the basic level of the BMW service package. You'll have to give them a bit more again, or a lot more again, if you want to include brake replacements and other consumables like that in that package. And the warranty on the 5 Series is 3 years with unlimited kilometers, and that doesn't compare too well to the Mercedes-Benz 5-year unlimited kilometer warranty here in Australia. So now on to my favorite part of this review, which is explaining why the M550i is so special. At the start of this video, you'll remember I made a pretty big claim, which is that the M550i is one of the best cars that BMW currently make, cars or SUVs. And that is a big deal because BMW have really kind of spread themselves so broad these days. They make a car for everyone. And out of all of those, it's the M550i, which is, if not the most special, it's certainly up there for me. Now, just to give you a bit of philosophy and a bit of background on why I think that is, now I am an E46 BMW owner, so perhaps I am influenced a little bit by the traditional way in which BMW's greatest hits of the late 90s, early 2000s drove. But I don't think those attributes really go out of style. Things like good damping, good steering, good powertrains, good gearboxes, those things aren't just a fashion, they make a great car. And the M550i is a lot like an E46 or an E39 in a lot of ways. In particular, this is as close as you can get to a contemporary interpretation of the E39 M5, probably the most famous M5, one of the most famous sports sedans BMW has ever created. Now, of course, there is a current generation M5, which is sold as an M5 competition or an M5 CS here in Australia, but the current day M5 is so hardcore that it's actually a different style of four-door performance car to what the E39 M5 was really like. And instead it's the M550i that has filled in the role of the sort of comfortable GT, still with an absolutely rip-roaring V8 engine, as we're about to open up here. Wow! Yeah, it's certainly not lacking for pace. You would never think that just because you bought the M550i instead of the M5 that you were picking up a slow car. Quite to the contrary. There's heaps of power, heaps of torque. This is a really fast car, but the way it proceeds down the road is totally different to an M5. And in a country like Australia, it's actually the M550i that's a much more usable sports sedan day to day, particularly if you don't really intend to track the car that often. And I think most people buying a six-figure luxury sedan probably don't intend to track the car. Instead, it's more likely to be a daily, but then a car that you can take out onto a great country road, like one of my favorites I'm currently driving, and the car is really blissful to drive. We'll come back to the chassis in a sec. Let's talk about power. So we've got a 4.4 litre twin turbo petrol V8 under the bonnet, producing 390 kilowatts of power and 750 newton meters of torque. So equivalent torque to an M5 comp, but a bit less power, 70 kilowatts less, but 390 is still plenty. You know, it's a genuine sort of 4-second car, a little bit less than 4 seconds, but it's really the mid-range just allows it to have these spurts of power absolutely anywhere. Effortless would be a lazy way to describe it. It's just so adequate, really, on any kind of Australian road, and you can just tell this thing would be an absolutely tremendous autobahn destroyer as well. Now, because we've got that V8 up front, we do have that lovely Bentay engine noise accompanying the whole experience. We have standard all-wheel drive, not really something to worry about too much if you're a purist like me, because it's still a very rear-biased all-wheel drive system. What we don't have though is the M5's ability to completely disconnect the front axle from the driveline so that it's 100% rear drive. But I must say that in grand touring driving with intent like this, you never really feel like the car's pulling with the front wheels. Instead, it just sort of hunts for a little bit more grip than a pure rear drive version. That being said, in Sport Plus, with the ESC set to its halfway on, halfway off mode, it still feels like a genuinely rear-driven BMW in most ways. Now, keep in mind the M550i has four-wheel steering. You can go for an M550i Pure, which doesn't have quite as high a specification inside, doesn't have the leather door uppers and things like that, and that only has two-wheel steering. Now, that's probably what I would go for. The M550i Pure is actually a real bargain when you factor in the depth of engineering in that car and the sheer amount of power from this terrific engine. But if you want an M550i with a lot, fair enough. The four-wheel steering system is actually significantly less invasive than the same system that Audi uses, which I think is fascinating. Also a shout out to the 8-speed ZF auto. Really, really good auto. Probably my second favorite auto after a Porsche PDK. It sort of just knows what you want. It has 3 or 4 different modes of aggression. In Sport Plus gearbox right now, but Sport Plus, and then on the drive detente, if I move it over to the Sport detente on the shifter, it becomes even more aggressive, but it's never silly. It's never like a sport gearbox on a Volkswagen, for example, where it just holds, you know, high revs no matter what. It still will shift up, but it just has a kind of uncanny sense of what you're trying to achieve. Now, interestingly, I'm more of a 6-cylinder BMW person. Of course, a straight 6 is more of a classic BMW engine than a V8, but the 5 Series range in Australia makes it a bit hard to indulge in that because the 540i petrol is not sold here. So you can get a 4-cylinder petrol in 520i and 530i formats. You can get a really excellent 530D 6-cylinder diesel, but from there it's a jump to the M550i. In some ways it's a bit sad because that creamy, lighter 540i engine is really something special, but the fact is not many people buy the BMW 5 Series anymore. Almost everyone buys the X5, and that's a shame because unless you really, really do need the extra space, a 5 Series is so much better to drive. And that's no shade to the X5, which is one of my favorite large SUVs. It is a driver's SUV, but there's daylight between something like an X5 and this 5 Series in terms of driver engagement. It is all about being closer to the road. It's about being lighter. It's about there being less stress on the suspension, on the steering, that lightness allows. We're not having to try and challenge the laws of physics because the car is not riding really high. Now, the steering is more digital than a classic BMW of 20 to 30 years ago, but it's, at least the ratio is very intuitive. The front wheels are going to go where you point them. You can steer on the throttle. Oversteering moments are still very, very possible despite the xDrive system. And it still has that characteristic BMW sort of slow self-centering. I quite like that. And then there's the ride. Again, characteristic BMW stuff. Despite the big wheels outside, low profile tires, the ride is still compliant, level, comfortable. You've got 2 adjustable damping modes, comfort and sport. Comfort can get a little bit boisterous when pushed. The body control isn't quite as tight. Sport is pretty good. Even on a pockmarked country road like this, it's not uncomfortable, but you do get the sense that the body of this G35 series is pretty stiff. Just sort of bobs along, breathes with the road pretty nicely. Perhaps it's not quite as compliant as a Mercedes-AMG E53, but I think the two of them would be neck and neck. And of course the E53, as much as I like that car, it doesn't have a V8. And I think that speaks to the slightly unique position the M550i is in now, where it does allow you to have kind of a comfort spec V8 in this part of the market, which has really dried up. You used to be able to buy, just a plain old 550i. You used to be able to buy a Mercedes E500, A6 4.2, that sort of thing. You can't really do it anymore. Now, BMW does dress this car up as an M Performance. It's probably got about 1 billion M badges around the thing, but it doesn't actually feel like an M car. It feels like a traditional GT comfort-oriented V8. It does have especially good body control. It's never ever sloppy, but it doesn't punish you with an overly stiff, overly firm suspension, so it makes a good partner for Australian roads in that sense. So you do very much get the inherent feeling that the M550i is with you. You know where the body is, you know what it's up to. There's a lot of signals from the road and from the car. All of that goes into making it a really likable sports sedan. Looks good too, subjective stuff like that. It appeals to me. Of course, I wish there was a touring version, but if that's up your alley, then the Alpina B5 is Similar, but a lot more expensive. But you can get it as a wagon, so there's that. And then on the safety front, I like the way BMW do adaptive safety tech, because not only is it some of the best in the industry, the lane keep assist is very accurate, the adaptive cruise control is sensitive and fast to respond, the blind spot monitoring system is pretty good, you've got AEB, you can turn it off really easily. There's a dedicated button right here that lets you turn off all of the systems or lower their sensitivity, whatever your preference. So I find that, you know, in daily commuting or on the highway, I just like to have them all on because they're not invasive, they just work. But then on a road like this where you don't really want lane keep nipping at your line as you sort of track a more of a racing line in the lane, you can get rid of it. Best of both worlds. So those are my impressions of the facelifted BMW M550i. This car shows you that if you don't need an SUV, please don't buy an X5 M50i, for example. It's a great car, I won't lie to you, but you never feel that close to the experience in a large SUV. Even if it has a similarly powerful engine to this car, you're always held at arm's length. When you get into something low set like the M550i, it opens up a whole additional world of driver engagement. This is a beast, but it also tells you a lot about what's going on under the car. It's fun to drive, it's comfortable, it's handsome, and for what it is, for the level of engineering and sophistication in this car, it's not even that expensive. No, that's easy for me to say, but you know, the relative value for money is there. Keen to know your thoughts though? Let me know down below this video. While you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.